Ladies and gentlemen, today I share with you a story that has captured the imagination of millions around the world. It's a story of transformation, courage, and spiritual awakening. A story many found shocking, not because it was wrong, but because it was unexpected. This is the world Angelina Jolie stepped into after embracing Islam. Every journey begins with a question. A quiet voice that whispers, "Is there more to life than this?" For Angelina Jolie, that voice grew louder over the years, echoing beneath the glitz of Hollywood, the red carpets, and flashing cameras. To the world, she had it all: stunning beauty, global recognition, a successful acting career, and humanitarian accolades. Yet behind the carefully curated smiles and headlines, something deeper stirred. A sense of emptiness that success alone could not fill. Her turning point didn't happen on a stage or in front of a camera, but in the most unlikely places. Refugee camps in Syria, hospitals in Yemen, and war zones in Sudan. As a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, Angelina traveled extensively, witnessing the harsh realities of war, poverty, and displacement. But what struck her most profoundly wasn't just the suffering. It was the strength of the people, particularly Muslim women and children, who, despite losing everything, held on to their faith with unshakable conviction. Angelina began asking questions, not out of curiosity, but from a deep longing for understanding. How could people who had nothing still speak words of gratitude? What gave them the courage to keep living through unimaginable pain? Time after time, the answer was the same: faith in Allah. It was this steadfast belief in something greater. The submission to God's will, the daily prayers, the remembrance of the divine, that fascinated her. During quiet nights in her hotel rooms, after long days on the field, she began reading. First articles, then the Quran. Not as an academic or journalist, but as a seeker. She read the stories of the prophets, the message of mercy and justice, the concept of Tawheed, the oneness of God. The verses about orphans, about compassion, about accountability deeply resonated with her. Surah al-Baqarah, with its wisdom on life's tests and patience, became a chapter she revisited often. Slowly, she began to realize that Islam wasn't the harsh, restrictive religion she had once heard about. It was beautiful, balanced, and incredibly powerful. Her children, adopted from various cultures and faiths, became part of this journey too. She shared what she was learning, engaging in open discussions about belief, values, and purpose. What began as curiosity turned into quiet conviction. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't seeking a label. She was searching for truth. In this phase of awakening, Angelina distanced herself from the noise of fame. Meditation and yoga, once her forms of spiritual grounding, gave way to something deeper. Reflection, tafakkur, intention, snaya, and silent conversations with God. She found herself waking up at dawn, not for a film shoot, but drawn by the serenity of Fajr, the early morning prayer. Though not yet Muslim, she was already stepping onto the path of Islam in spirit. But as her understanding grew, so did her internal conflict. Embracing Islam meant more than a personal change. It meant facing the world's reactions. She knew the cost, the headlines, the criticism, the backlash. But truth has its own gravity. You can only circle around it for so long before it pulls you in completely. Angelina's personal awakening wasn't sudden. It was a gradual unfolding, like dawn breaking after a long night. It wasn't driven by emotion alone, but by deep reflection, study, and witnessing the dignity of faith lived in its purest form. By the time she said the Shahada, the Islamic testimony of faith, in a private setting, surrounded by a few trusted individuals, she wasn't just stepping into a new religion. She was stepping into the life she had been searching for all along. This was not a conversion. It was a return to the fitra, the innate human inclination toward the divine. And for Angelina Jolie, it was the beginning of everything truly meaningful. When news broke that Angelina Jolie had accepted Islam, the world didn't react with quiet contemplation. It exploded. The story hit headlines like a thunderclap. Angelina Jolie converts to Islam, splashed across news sites, tabloids, and social media platforms. Journalists scrambled to confirm the story. Bloggers speculated. Influencers weighed in. And the world, divided as it is, responded in all the ways you might expect, and some you wouldn't. The media frenzy was instant, global, and intense. Mainstream outlets from Los Angeles to London, Dubai to Delhi, covered the story with feverish energy. News anchors asked, "Is this real or a PR stunt?" Panels of commentators debated on live television. Within hours, Jolie's name trended on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, with millions discussing her decision, most having never spoken about religion so publicly before. For many fans, it was shocking. Angelina Jolie had always stood as a symbol of strength, independence, and humanitarianism. But Islam, that didn't align with the Western media's typical portrayal of the religion. Some expressed disbelief. "This has to be fake." Others mourned, "We've lost her to extremism." And then there were those who simply couldn't understand. Why would someone like her choose such a restrictive faith? These reactions didn't come from informed minds, but from a deeply rooted misunderstanding of Islam. A misunderstanding often shaped by decades of negative media portrayals, political narratives, and cultural stereotypes. To many in the West, Islam was still seen through a post-9/11 lens, a religion associated with oppression, violence, and rigidity. Jolie's conversion disrupted that narrative. It challenged people to reconsider what they thought they knew. And yet, amidst the backlash, there was also profound support. Millions of Muslims across the globe, from Jakarta to Johannesburg, Istanbul to Islamabad, welcomed her with open hearts. Messages flooded in. "Sister Angelina, welcome to Islam." Mosques in various countries offered prayers of gratitude. Young Muslim girls posted videos expressing how her decision gave them hope, made them feel seen, and helped validate their own faith in a world that often belittled it. Some celebrities quietly sent her messages of solidarity. A few others, especially those with conservative or nationalist leanings, distanced themselves. Fashion brands that once partnered with her suddenly turned silent. Offers slowed. Interview requests became filtered, cautious, or aggressive in tone. Angelina's own team had to manage the PR storm carefully. They released no immediate statement, fueling even more speculation. Was it true? Was it just a phase? A spiritual experiment? But those close to her knew this wasn't a trend. Jolie was not one to chase headlines. In fact, she had often tried to avoid them. This decision, like much of her humanitarian work, came from conviction, not calculation. When she finally addressed the world, subtly, respectfully, and without theatrics, she said, "I've spent most of my life asking questions. Islam gave me answers. It gave me peace. That one sentence went viral. Still, the reactions continued. Some Islamophobic figures ramped up hate speech. Right-wing groups used her conversion to stir fear. But at the same time, mosques reported an increase in visitors and inquiries. People began picking up Qur'ans out of curiosity. Angelina Jolie, without preaching a word, had caused a global spiritual ripple. In an age where celebrity culture often revolves around scandal, excess, and superficial trends, her decision stood apart. It wasn't performative. It wasn't monetized. It was quiet, intentional, and deeply personal. And ironically, that's what made it so powerful and so shocking to a world addicted to spectacle. The media storm may have been loud, but Jolie herself remained calm, grounded not in headlines, but in the quiet truth she had found within. After Angelina Jolie embraced Islam, what surprised many wasn't just the declaration of faith. It was how dramatically, yet gracefully, her entire lifestyle began to transform. For someone long used to the chaos of Hollywood and the demands of global fame, the change was not loud or forced. It was quiet, consistent, and deeply rooted. From the inside out, Angelina was evolving. And the first thing people noticed was her peace. In the past, she had spoken about struggles with mental health, anxiety, and emotional turmoil. Experiences she never hid. Fame came with its own burdens: public scrutiny, constant travel, the pressures of parenting in the spotlight. But now, something had shifted. Those around her described her as calmer, more centered, and remarkably grounded. The woman once known for her intense energy now carried a serene presence. There was a stillness to her that even her critics couldn't ignore. Friends and colleagues began to notice a subtle transformation in her behavior and choices. She became more intentional with her words and presence. No longer one to chase headlines or bask in attention, Angelina appeared to retreat from the noisy world of red carpets and paparazzi. Her public appearances became less frequent, her interviews more meaningful, and her demeanor more composed. The modesty in her clothing was perhaps the most visible change. Gone were the designer gowns with plunging necklines or extravagant cuts. In their place appeared more flowing, elegant, and modest attire, often with a scarf or shawl draped over her head and shoulders. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't a statement to the fashion industry. It was an expression of inner conviction. But modesty, in the Islamic sense, is more than clothing. It's a way of life. Angelina adopted a softer tone in interviews, avoided unnecessary public controversy, and even adjusted her film roles. She turned down scripts that conflicted with her new values, choosing instead to focus on stories that uplifted, educated, or reflected humanity's deeper truths. Her home life also reflected the transformation. She introduced regular prayer times into her daily routine. Even when traveling, she would set aside quiet moments for Salah, the 5 daily prayers, treating them not as obligations, but as sacred conversations with her Creator. Her children observed these changes, and rather than being confused, many embraced the peace that came with the new rhythm of their household. It's important to understand that this wasn't a celebrity makeover. This was a spiritual metamorphosis. Angelina didn't change to meet expectations. She changed because she had found something that finally made sense. A purpose, a framework, a connection that anchored her. Islam didn't erase her identity. It refined it. It added depth to her compassion, purpose to her humanitarian work, and a moral compass to her decisions. While some whispered she had become less Western, the truth was she had become more human, reconnecting with values of humility, gratitude, and service. The peace she found in Islam radiated outward. It wasn't artificial or fleeting. It was the kind of peace that comes when a restless soul finally finds home. A spiritual home in submission to Allah. And this transformation wasn't just personal. It challenged the public, especially in the West, to reconsider what it means when someone truly lives their faith. It showed that Islam isn't about restriction. It's about alignment, aligning the heart, mind, and actions with divine guidance. Angelina Jolie's outward changes were just reflections of the inner shift that had taken place. What the world saw, her clothing, her choices, her calm, were simply signs of the stillness she had discovered deep within. And that peace, once found, became unshakable when someone like Angelina Jolie, a global icon, Oscar-winning actress, and renowned humanitarian, makes a deeply personal choice like embracing Islam. It does not go unnoticed. In fact, it invites not only curiosity and admiration, but also criticism, skepticism, and backlash. Yet what defined this chapter of her journey was not the negativity itself, but the dignity and grace with which she faced it. The backlash came quickly. Some former fans turned hostile. Online comment sections flooded with hateful messages. Certain talk show hosts mocked her decision, questioning her sanity, calling it career suicide, or worse, accusing her of betraying Western values. News outlets with conservative leanings spun her conversion as a political act, as if her decision to follow Islam was a threat to the status quo. Hollywood insiders whispered that she had become difficult to work with, or too controversial. Endorsement deals that had once been effortless began to dry up. Fashion brands subtly distanced themselves. Some movie offers were quietly withdrawn or rewritten to minimize her role. Invitations to high-profile events disappeared. She wasn't cancelled outright, but the message was clear. Her faith made people uncomfortable. But amidst this rising tide of judgment, Angelina didn't retaliate. She didn't argue or try to explain herself in every interview. Instead, she chose silence over spectacle, and patience over provocation. In many ways, her response mirrored one of the central values of her new faith: sabr, patience in the face of hardship. She understood that people fear what they don't understand. She had once been among them, shaped by media narratives, unaware of what Islam truly stood for. Now that she had seen it from the inside, the peace, the discipline, the compassion, she didn't need to convince anyone. Her peace was not up for debate. In one rare, carefully worded public statement, she said, "I know there are questions. I understand the confusion. But this decision was not made for the world. It was made for my soul. And I am at peace with it." That sentence, delivered with quiet confidence, silenced many. It reminded people that beneath the global fame, Angelina was a human being. A mother, a thinker, a woman searching for truth. Her faith was not a performance. It was a deeply personal transformation. She also received support, but it came quietly. Fellow celebrities who had faced similar backlash for their faith, identity, or values sent her private messages. Muslim scholars and community leaders expressed gratitude for her courage and urged her to stay strong. Millions of Muslims around the world felt inspired by her patience, seeing her as someone who reflected the Quranic verse. Indeed, those who have said, "Our Lord is Allah," and then remain steadfast, the angels descend upon them, saying, "Do not fear and do not grieve." Surah Fussilat 4:1-30. What impressed many was that Angelina didn't use her faith as a platform. She didn't launch a Muslim brand, didn't turn her journey into a documentary or a book deal. She didn't capitalize on her transformation. She simply lived it, authentically and unapologetically. She began declining roles that clashed with her values, but she never condemned others who chose differently. She dressed more modestly, but without judgment. She withdrew from certain Hollywood circles, not out of arrogance, but because her priorities had shifted. This quiet dignity, this refusal to engage in drama, became a powerful form of dawas, inviting others to truth. It reminded people that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes strength is a woman standing tall, unshaken, while the world tries to make her small. In facing backlash with grace, Angelina Jolie did not just protect her faith, she honored it. And in doing so, she inspired countless others to stand firm in their truth, no matter how loudly the world tries to drown it out. For most people, a spiritual awakening remains a private affair, an internal shift that quietly guides their decisions and personal growth. But for someone like Angelina Jolie, whose life is always under a global microscope, her transformation through Islam brought with it a profound sense of responsibility. And with her newfound faith came a new mission, not to preach, but to serve with purpose. Even before her conversion, Angelina had earned worldwide respect for her humanitarian work. As a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador, and later a special envoy for the UNHCR, she had already spent over 2 decades visiting refugee camps, war zones, and crisis areas. But now, with Islam anchoring her worldview, these efforts took on a deeper, spiritual dimension. Where once she acted out of compassion and justice, she now served with intention and spiritual accountability. Islam didn't redirect her humanitarian mission. It refined it. It added meaning, structure, and moral clarity to what she was already doing. In the months following her conversion, Angelina intensified her work in predominantly Muslim regions. Not as an outsider offering aid, but as someone who now felt a deep kinship with the people. She returned to Syria and visited camps in Turkey and Jordan, not just as a celebrity or envoy, but as a sister in faith. In Gaza, she wept with mothers who had lost their children. In Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, she sat with stateless families, listening and praying quietly. The media captured the images: a modestly dressed Jolie holding hands with hijabi women, sharing meals, sitting cross-legged on the ground, and the world took notice. Critics wondered, was this her way of promoting Islam? But she never preached. She never used a platform to lecture or persuade. What she did instead was live Islam's values: dignity, mercy, empathy, and justice through her actions. Her conduct became her Dawaira's invitation to faith, drawing attention not to herself, but to the principles she had come to cherish. Her mission also included addressing a growing concern: Islamophobia. She had once been silent on the topic, cautious about appearing political. But as a Muslim, silence was no longer an option. In an op. ed for a major international newspaper. She wrote, "It is a tragedy when people judge an entire faith based on fear. I have seen firsthand the beauty of Islam in the hearts of those who've suffered the most. We must rise above hate and choose understanding." That single statement sparked discussions in newsrooms, classrooms, and boardrooms. Jolie wasn't just a Hollywood figure anymore. She was now a voice for one of the world's most misunderstood religions. She also began supporting grassroots Muslim organizations, especially those focused on education, women's empowerment, and refugee rights. But she chose to do it quietly, refusing to plaster her name on every effort. She visited Islamic schools, met with scholars, and engaged in interfaith dialogues, often away from cameras. For her, the work wasn't about headlines. It was about healing, truth, and legacy. Angelina's mission had become multidimensional. As a mother, she now prioritized teaching her children about Islamic ethics, compassion, gratitude, and social justice. As a public figure, she used her influence to amplify unheard voices. And as a believer, she committed herself to serving humanity, not for fame, but for the pleasure of Allah. Through Islam, Angelina didn't change her mission. She deepened it. Her path shifted from charity to Allah's worship, from passion to purpose, from public service to spiritual service. And with every act of kindness, she echoed a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, "The most beloved people to Allah are those who are most beneficial to others." Al-Mujamal, or Sat. This was her new mission. And it was more meaningful than anything the silver screen had ever offered. When Angelina Jolie embraced Islam, it did more than change her personal life. It sparked a global conversation that transcended borders, beliefs, and biases. It wasn't just about a Hollywood actress converting to a religion often misunderstood in the West. It was about the symbolism, the challenge, and the awakening that her decision triggered across societies. Suddenly, Islam was no longer a distant, foreign idea for many. It was humanized. For decades, the religion had been largely presented in the Western world through the lens of conflict, extremism, and cultural division. News cycles focused on war, torn countries, acts of violence, or oppressive regimes, rarely making room for the everyday beauty, discipline, or spiritual richness of Islam. But now, a globally admired humanitarian and respected public figure was saying, in essence, "This faith brought me peace." And people began to listen. Social media became a landscape of dialogue and discovery. Hashtags like Pay Angelina Jolie a Muslim and Fay Islam trended across platforms. Bookstores saw increased interest in Islamic literature, and searches for terms like, "What is Islam?" surged. YouTubers began uploading content explaining the basics of Islam, often quoting Jolie's public statements as a springboard. Muslims around the world, especially those living in non-Muslim majority countries, felt a renewed sense of dignity. For years, many had hidden their faith or felt the need to constantly explain it. Now, they could point to someone the world already admired. If someone like Angelina Jolie could embrace Islam with grace and pride, why couldn't they? In homes, workplaces, classrooms, and even coffee shops, conversations began. Not all were easy. Some were skeptical, even hostile. But the shift had started. Angelina's conversion had cracked open a cultural silence. And through that crack, truth began to shine through. Many Muslims, particularly women, expressed how empowered they felt seeing a global icon wear modest clothing proudly. For some hijabi women, who were often judged or stereotyped, this was more than symbolic. It was healing. It affirmed that their identity was not backwards or shameful, but sacred and worthy of respect. At the same time, non-Muslims began asking more nuanced questions. What drew her to Islam? What do Muslims actually believe? Is it possible that I've misunderstood this religion all along? These were not questions fueled by political talking points or social media outrage, but by genuine human curiosity. And that curiosity is powerful. Angelina Jolie didn't become a religious spokesperson. She never claimed to have all the answers. But in many ways, her silence was more effective than speeches. Her calm presence, her refusal to be defensive, her consistency in action, all of it invited people not to agree with her, but to seek understanding. Universities organized panel discussions on spiritual journeys. Interfaith groups held events on common values between Islam and other religions. Journalists began writing more balanced articles. In some places, mosques opened their doors for community tours, inspired by increased interest from Jolie's conversion. People wanted to see what Islam really looked like, not on the news, but in real life. What she unintentionally ignited was not a trend, but a recalibration of public perception. Of course, not everyone was moved. Some continued to criticize, mock, or resist the idea that someone like Angelina Jolie could find solace in Islam. But even that resistance proved something: her decision could no longer be ignored. Islam was no longer a distant subject. It had entered the heart of mainstream conversation, with sincerity, intelligence, and dignity. And that is perhaps the most powerful outcome of her journey. Not that she became Muslim, but that her courage invited millions to look at Islam again. Not through the lens of fear or politics, but through the lens of human experience, truth seeking, and inner peace. Inspiring a global conversation was never her intention. But sometimes, all it takes is one honest soul making a brave choice to awaken the conscience of a generation.